He had never seen his name printed on an invitation. Not once, not for Mike's wedding, not for Chris's, not for Rachel's, and certainly not for Josh's. While others exchanged vows under golden lights and smiling faces, Noah Bennett sat alone watching every moment unfold through the cold glow of a computer screen. He used to believe he was simply forgotten. The youngest sibling, the quiet one, the too sensitive boy, as relatives used to call him with a nervous smile. But as years passed and patterns repeated, that illusion faded. He hadn't been forgotten. He had been erased. Noah grew up in a modest home in Portland. There were photo albums on the hallway shelf, wedding portraits of his older siblings in white dresses, gray suits, arms linked, and yet his face never appeared. He was always the one taking the photos, or worse, never even invited. At 10, when Mike got married, Noah was told weddings weren't for children. Too long, too loud, they said. So he stayed with a neighbor and played with Legos on the floor while his parents dressed up and smiled for someone else's forever. But even as he got older, the reasons changed shape, but not meaning. Adults only, they said for Rachel's wedding. And yet, cousins younger than him walked down the aisle as flower girls and ring bearers. For Josh's wedding, the invitation never arrived at all. He only knew the date because someone tagged their location at the reception. And even then, he watched in silence. He tried not to ask why, but he always knew. It started one evening, quiet and small. His mother opened the door to his bedroom and froze staring at Noah sitting beside a boy from school, their shoulders brushing, their laughter low and warm. That moment passed without a word, but the silence that followed never ended. No one mentioned it again, and from that point on, they acted as though it had never happened, as though he had never happened. Birthdays became quieter. Holidays, less warm, and weddings were something for them, not for him. At family gatherings, if he asked about the latest plans, someone would cough and change the subject. If he lingered on a photo too long, someone would gently slide the album away. And slowly he learned to stay quiet, to shrink himself, to disappear. But there was always that screen, that one glowing window where he watched his own bloodline build lives he wasn't meant to witness. He studied the angles of the bridal veils, the choice of flowers, the color palettes. Not because he was bitter, he was curious, fascinated, drawn to the beauty of a day meant to celebrate love, even if that love never had a seat for him. So he watched, alone, year after year, until one day he decided to change the story. If you've ever felt like the only one not invited, like your name was quietly erased from moments that should have held you close, this story is for you. Follow more stories that matter at Heart Story. Noah left home before the silence swallowed him whole. At 20, with a suitcase full of notebooks and a heart still bruised from birthdays no one showed up for. He moved across the state and enrolled in a design program that specialized in event planning. It felt ironic at first, someone who'd never been invited to a wedding, learning how to build one. But Noah knew what it meant to be left out, and that gave him an instinct others didn't have. He understood the value of inclusion, not as a trend, but as salvation. When he publicly came out that year, it was less an announcement and more a quiet reclaiming of breath. A single post, a single sentence, and in return, a flood of consequences. Rachel messaged him only once. "You're humiliating the family." Chris unfollowed him entirely, and his mother, the woman who once sang him lullabies, replied with, "Why can't you just keep it private? You always make things more difficult than they need to be." Noah didn't reply. He didn't argue. He simply kept moving. His early career was nothing glamorous, folding chairs, setting up flower arches in the rain, patching torn tablecloths while brides wept over centerpieces. But he treated each wedding like it mattered, because he knew that somewhere in every celebration, there was someone watching from the sidelines, aching to be seen. Over time, his name began to carry weight in the Portland event world. He became known not just for aesthetics, but for heart, for understanding the things most planners overlooked, like seating charts that respected estranged siblings, or ceremony readings that didn't pretend every parent was proud. Then came Jamie. They met at a spring wedding where Jamie was photographing the bride's entrance through a wall of wildflowers, and Noah was coordinating the timing down to the second. Jamie was Canadian, warm, with kind eyes and a camera that never stopped moving. He had this gentle way of asking questions, never invasive, just curious. They began running into each other more often, at venues tucked into forests and rooftop receptions with paper lanterns. At first, it was casual, but there was one moment that changed everything. It was after a lakeside wedding, late at night. They sat on a bench still draped in fairy lights, their suits wrinkled, their shoes kicked off. Jamie looked at him and asked, so softly it almost disappeared in the wind, "Have you ever had a wedding of your own?" And Noah froze. No one had ever asked. Not seriously, not like that. He didn't answer right away. His chest ached, not because the answer was no, but because the why behind it burned. Jamie didn't press. He just placed his hand gently over Noah's and whispered, "You make weddings magical for others. Let me make one for you." That was the first time Noah cried in front of someone who didn't flinch. The kind of cry that comes not from sadness, but from the weight of being seen, really seen after so many years of being invisible. He never thought love would come wrapped in such quiet kindness, but it had, and it held him in ways his family never could. Jamie proposed in the most Noah way possible. Quiet, thoughtful, and surrounded by the very people who had walked beside them when no one else would. It happened during an end-of-season party hosted by vendors in the wedding industry. There were no fancy speeches, just a soft pause in music, a spotlight barely brighter than the fairy lights, and Jamie holding up a simple ring as he said, "You make weddings magical. Let me make one for you." Noah's knees gave out before he even whispered yes. Planning a wedding for others had been his life's work, but planning one for himself was something else entirely. This wasn't just an event, it was a reclamation. At first, they imagined something intimate, maybe a private ceremony near the Columbia River Gorge, with friends gathered under the open sky. But then came the unexpected message from someone Noah had almost forgotten. Evelyn Rowe. She was once a client, a grieving widow who had nearly canceled her entire wedding renewal after her husband passed just a week before. Noah had worked with her through tears, grief, and the silence that follows loss. He'd redesigned the entire event into a memorial-style tribute where love was honored, not mourned. Now she was reaching out again. This time, not as a client, but as a believer. Evelyn had watched Noah grow from a quiet planner into a voice for those who had none. And when she heard he was engaged, she made an offer she would fully sponsor their wedding and livestream it publicly, as part of a campaign she was funding to spotlight underrepresented love stories. It was bold, but Noah didn't hesitate. He didn't want a hidden celebration. He wanted the world to see that someone like him, excluded, erased, could still build something worthy of being witnessed. So they began planning, not just a wedding, but a statement. The venue was set on a rolling hill outside Portland, an open-air affair with suspended lights, wildflowers from local growers, and a stage built not just for vows, but for visibility. Noah made one clear decision: no invites to his family, not because of hate, but because the wedding was sacred. It was for those who had loved him on purpose. Still, the news traveled. Rachel, never one to stay quiet, posted a sharp jab on Facebook the week before the wedding. "Even a wedding has to be public now. What happened to keeping sacred things sacred? Desperate much?" Noah saw the post. He didn't respond, but his chest tightened the way it always had, like the world wanted him small again. He took a breath, kept planning. Then, 2 days before the wedding, a knock came at the door. It was Chris. Noah hadn't seen his brother in years, not since the unfollow, not since the silence. But Chris wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a young boy, no older than 12, with the same sharp eyes and hesitant smile Noah once had. In his hand, a folded envelope. In his eyes, something fragile. Chris didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't even mention the wedding. He just handed over the letter and said, "It's not for you, it's for him." Noah read the note that night. It was from Chris, addressed to his son, apologizing for the years of silence, for the prejudice passed down, for not knowing how to love a child who had just told him he was gay. The final line stopped Noah cold. "I didn't want you to grow up thinking love should ever hide. Your uncle knows how to stand tall. Maybe he can help you do the same." Noah sat in the stillness for a long time after that. The decision didn't suddenly become easy, but something inside him shifted. This wedding was no longer just a vow to Jamie. It was a beacon for every child still waiting to be invited. The sky over Portland opened into a soft, golden blue the morning of the wedding. The venue, once just a hill with wind in its grass, had transformed into a sanctuary of intention. Every chair faced outward, not toward a church altar, but toward the horizon. A quiet reminder this love was never meant to be hidden. Noah stood behind a white curtain, adjusting the pin on his lapel, a small rainbow triangle, no bigger than a fingernail. It wasn't a statement, it was survival, worn with quiet pride. Jamie was already outside, speaking to the camera crew and the event coordinators Noah once trained himself. Drones hovered overhead, streaming the ceremony to Evelyn's network partners. Social media hashtags were trending by sunrise. This was no longer just a wedding. It was a broadcast, a mirror held up to the world. Noah had reviewed every detail, except one. The guest list had remained sacred. Every name was chosen not for bloodline, but for loyalty. The people seated under those lights were florists who offered discounts when Noah had no clients, friends who brought him soup when he worked through the flu, couples he had married in fields and barns, on rooftops and in backyards, each of them having chosen Noah because he never asked them to fit in. There were no parents, no siblings. Chris had come 2 days before. Yes, but Noah never sent him an invitation. He had read the letter, folded it carefully, and placed it in a drawer. He understood the intention. He understood the boy. But this moment was not for repair. It was for peace. And peace required boundaries. As guests took their seats, the live stream counter ticked past 100,000 views, then 200, then 500,000. Evelyn Rowe stood in the front row, her silver hair pinned in loose waves, wearing the same pendant she had once almost buried with her husband. She gave Noah a quiet nod as he took his place. Jamie walked down the aisle first. The crowd fell still. Then Noah emerged, his suit light gray, his hands steady. He wasn't nervous. He had waited his entire life for this. When it came time for the vows, Jamie spoke first. His voice didn't tremble. It anchored. "Noah, you once told me you didn't belong to a family that saw you, that when you stood in front of a mirror, you didn't know if anyone could love the reflection. But today, Sebe, we stand in front of the world and say love sees you, love holds you, love chooses you." Noah's eyes glistened. Then he began. He didn't speak of bitterness. He didn't mention who wasn't there. He simply said, "I was once the boy left out of every picture, the one behind the camera, never in the frame. But today, I stand in the center not for attention, but for truth, because every person deserves to be loved without apology, and every child deserves to grow up believing their story matters." The applause was quiet at first, then steady, then thunderous. But somewhere beyond the lights, another screen lit up. Rachel had posted again. This time, it was a story of her living room, a TV in the background showing Noah's face. Her caption, "Imagine broadcasting your personal life like it's some kind of movie. Attention must be the only thing he's ever wanted." Mike posted a frowning emoji beneath it. Their mother shared the post with a line that read, "A wedding is not a performance." What a shame. Noah's phone stayed on airplane mode. He never saw them live. But Evelyn did. And during the reception, with the camera still rolling and guests dancing under strings of lights, Evelyn took the microphone. She wasn't scheduled to speak, but no one stopped her. "When I lost my husband, I lost my compass. Noah Bennett was the only one who didn't tell me to move on. He told me to stand still, to feel, to grieve. And then, when I was ready to honor love in a way only I could define, that man isn't just a wedding planner, he's a healer. And for the family who couldn't show up tonight, don't worry, because tonight the whole world did. The room froze in awe, then erupted in applause. That night, Noah didn't go online, he didn't check the comments. He danced with Jamie under the stars, barefoot on the grass, laughing like no one had ever told him not to. He had kept his promise to himself. He built a love story where no one had to shrink to fit in. The wedding ended, but the echoes didn't. The lights were taken down. The flowers wilted softly in their vases. Guests flew home with photos and memories. But for Noah, the world had shifted. Not because the cameras captured it, not because it trended, but because it was real. It was his, and no one could take it away. Back in their apartment, the silence felt comforting for once. Noah sat by the window, still in his wedding shirt, holding his phone. It had been on airplane mode for nearly 2 days. Now it blinked with unread messages. He didn't open them all. He didn't need to. The ones that slipped through the screen were filled with sharp edges. Rachel's passive aggression, his mother's quiet disappointment, Mike's refusal to understand. Not one message asked if he was happy. Not one said congratulations. They only asked, why would you do this to us? How dare you make this public? You embarrassed your family. Noah didn't reply. He didn't rage. Instead, he printed each message, trimmed them neatly. He pasted them, one by one, into a white leather photo album with gold corners. On the cover, he wrote in black ink, "They said this, and I lived anyway." That album sat on a shelf beside a different book, his wedding guest book. The contrast was not bitter, it was balance. A full portrait of the road he walked. A week after the wedding, Jamie gave Noah a gift. It wasn't expensive, just a large wooden frame, hand-carved, with a photograph inside. They were dancing, just the two of them, under strings of warm lights. Noah barefoot, Jamie laughing, their foreheads touching. Beneath the image, engraved in soft silver, "Family isn't who you're born to. It's who you choose to dance with." Noah held the frame in both hands, then placed it above the couch right where his mother's portrait used to hang, back when he still tried to please her. But the story didn't end there. That afternoon, he wrapped a small package. Inside, a flash drive with the wedding video and a printed transcript of his vows. Tucked between them, a handwritten note. It wasn't addressed to Rachel or Chris or their mother. It was for a 12-year-old boy. Chris's son, the boy who had stood at Noah's doorstep, unsure and afraid, carrying the same eyes Noah once saw in his own reflection. On the note, Noah wrote, "If one day you need a family, I'll be here." He didn't expect a reply. He didn't wait for one. He simply mailed it, then walked outside into the soft afternoon light with Jamie beside him. The following week, Noah and Jamie opened the doors to their new office. The windows were wide, the walls were pale yellow. Light poured in. On the glass door, a new sign glistened in sunlight. "Chosen weddings for the families we choose." Inside, the front desk held two things: a framed rainbow pin and a bowl of guest candies wrapped in pastel foil. The tagline underneath the logo read, "You were never too much. You were never too late. You were always enough." And from that moment forward, Noah made a different kind of vow, not for cameras, not for applause, but for every person who walked through that door hoping to be seen. He vowed to never let anyone feel like a shadow in their own story again. What would you tell your younger self? If they were watching your life today, share it into the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us. Love isn't always loud, but it is always enough. Only on Heart Story.